So now we're going to shift a little bit and see what kind of tools are available to help you. So these tools are each ways of bringing a specific set of insights. And the caveat that goes with using tools is first that you really need to understand the tool and get the most out of it that that tool provides, but you have to trust your own judgment too, because sometimes the tool will tell you what everybody else already knows, which is a great foundation. But if you have no more insights than everybody else in the market, you probably can't perform better than anybody else in the market. And so using your own judgment and creativity is an important element of that. So I'm going to talk very quickly about a set of tools here that are more or less commonly used. I talked about Steve Blank and the lean startup method. And one of the tools that he has embraced is a tool most clearly articulated by Alexander Ostwalder called the Business Model Canvas. And it really is a summary of all of these different components of analysis that you do, talking about at the center value propositions, and then on the right-hand side, it's really about channels and how you fit into the external market. And on the left is key activities, resources, partners. And at the bottom, you have the two pieces of the business. What did it cost you to build it? And what revenue did you get from it? So in fact, we can look a little bit more closely at this. Customer segments. What are the different groups of people or organizations you aim to serve? We talked about that. Who are your customers? Value propositions. Really key question. What is the unique product or service that satisfies the need to relieve pain or gives the customer some advantage for which they're extremely eager, even greedy? Channels. How do you communicate with and deliver value to its customers? Direct sales force, indirect channel, web selling, bundling with somebody else's product, lots of different channel opportunities. And what's the nature of the relationship? How do you gain customers? How do you retain customers? How do you grow customers? And I would say most importantly, how do you learn from customers? What's the feedback loop that allows you to evolve over time to do a better job of satisfying that customer, both with their current needs, and how do you learn what their emerging needs are? How do you learn what adjacent needs they have that you could start to fill up? You may have a specialized product for cleaning up latex paint stains, but you may find that you have a need to help them clean their paintbrushes, or you do want to satisfy their need for cleaning up oil-based paint spills, whatever. What are the revenue streams? How do you get money? What are the customers willing to pay? How are they paying? What's the financial structure that you need to put in place? You know, after all, you may be renting something to the customer, but did you have to buy that? Do you have a big capital need up front? It's really interesting to look at a business model like Uber. And one of the breakthroughs there is they realized that they could effectively run a taxi service or something that looks a little bit like a car rental service, but without ever buying a car. They used the fact that their drivers, who are in a sense their partners, already had that capital equipment and would be willing to essentially provide that capital equipment in order to participate in the revenue stream. What key resources do you need? which is often human resources, but it could be financial resources. If you're hurt, so you do have to buy the cars. It could be physical resources. I need to own a piece of land because I'm going to mine it. And it could be intellectual, some key asset, some secret you know, some patent you own, some access to a source of innovation that you can defend. And then what does it take to do it? What are the activities? What do you need to do well? How do you make choices? How do you do the engineering? How do you write the code? How do you build the box? What are the partnerships? And then what are the cost structures? Because that's going to both be important because it bounds what you're going to be able to charge and because it affects what kind of money you need to raise and what's the value proposition you're ultimately providing to investors. What kind of return on investment do you provide? Within that model, one of the key building blocks is this idea of pains and gains. And this is really a basic idea. That is, you need to simultaneously understand what a customer's trying to do. And it's not just a customer. Someone living in the US who's, managing their house, but a specific jobs. I have a spill on the floor of my kitchen. That's a specific job. I need to mop that up. And customers' needs can take on two flavors. One is pains. They have a problem they're trying to solve. The other is gains that they either have or you can help them realize that they have an upside potential, that they realize it would be awfully nice if they could watch first-run movies at home without having to drive to the movie theater. That's an upside gain, and it created the whole video streaming world. And then you take that back over to the product side, and you figure out, can you be a pain reliever for the pains? Can you be a gain creator? Can you create something that the customers didn't see as a pain or a need, but you can create? And that leads you ultimately back to the definition of what are the goods and services. One thing to keep in mind as you go through this is that the sum of a lot of small gains, or the sum of a set of small pain relievers, is nothing compared to the impact of one big pain reliever. And sometimes I see people, as they do this exercise, they come up with 27 different ways that the product might help the customer in this job. But no one of them is very compelling. And unfortunately, customers are disproportionately affected by the intense pain that comes from one problem. And their willingness to buy, their willingness especially to do something new, is much more driven by solving one pain. So focus in. Don't try to maximize the number of different gains and pains that you're addressing, but one that is so compelling that it will be important. And Ujwal Arkalgud, who is a great writer on general startup strategies, calls this the risk of falling into the complexity bias for a solution. That is, people think about, what are all the different features and bells and whistles and knobs I could put on this thing so it solves 47 different problems that customers have. And you end up often with something which is so complex it isn't usable. And in particular, you can't even find that it solves the one big pain that customers have. So you really want to identify what jobs to be done, figure out what are all the relevant pains and gains, prioritize what are the most intense or important pains or gains, and then design around relieving the most important pain points. And then and also creating and amplifying the most valuable gains that you can provide. Do one thing really, really well, and people will remember what you do. Do 10 things that are either only partially pain relievers or they're low-level pains to start with, and you won't stand out. Next tool, whole product. This is a pretty obvious thing, but it's really a reflection of the fact that you're not focusing on users, you're focusing on use cases where there's a specific opportunity in time and place and circumstance where your product is going to get used, and you want to make sure it does that well. And you can generically describe it as something where you start from some core product, and then you think about how it might be enriched or how you might create a better experience around it or how it could be extended with additional features. And then you figure out, well, what is the environment in which it can be delivered and used? You may say, oh, I'm going to create a marketplace around this so people can exchange elements which leverage the core product, or I'm going to provide additional learning, training opportunities, or I have additional support for configuration and installation, maybe by my own team, maybe by a partner who does that. There are all kinds of service providers or third-party integrators who may be part of delivering the whole product. And as one classic example, Hyatt or Hilton or Holiday Inn provides a hotel room. That's their basic service. But when they focus on a business traveler, they may say, oh, what that business traveler really wants around that, they want a newspaper, they want a quick breakfast, they want a frequent traveler program, they need a good internet connection, they may need laundry service. Whereas a vacation traveler may not care much about any of those things. They want kids stay free, they want on-site activities, they want late checkout, they want a really nice breakfast that they can linger over. They need a shuttle van to the airport, or they need it to be packaged as part of something else. So the generic product is the same, but the experience they build around those two use cases are quite different. Another common tool is the notions of TAM, SAM, and SOM. TAM, total available market. What is the total sum of people who could use your product or who are in a space that you think about targeting? And then you think about service available market, because your product, particularly in the early days, doesn't do everything that's required or wanted in that market. It's just the fraction that your product is fit for today. And sometimes, especially for a startup, it may be a tiny fraction of the total. And that's okay, because startups don't need huge current markets. If you are trying to get from $0 of annual sales to $1 million of annual sales, it doesn't really matter whether your market is $1 billion market or a $10 billion market. You've got to be thinking about just the piece of it that you can get. Once you've looked at, well, how much of the market is actually available to me for my current state of the product, you sort of say, okay, what's my share of that market? How much am I getting versus the other competitors who can service the same SAM? And that's important because that gives you an understanding of what the nature of competition is. If you're in an emerging market and you're really repartitioning and finding a new niche, you may have 100% of a small serviceable market. And that's okay if that small share is large enough to sustain you. And especially if you believe that the reasons that you can grow, because the use case will grow over time. But in general, when you start from that picture of TAM and SAM and SOM, you really want to look at segmentation to understand what's going on. As you look at that, can you break down What are the different types of users I am now or I could be serving? What vertical industry am I serving? Is this going into real estate or healthcare or retail or IT? Sometimes you start with a concept where you say, oh, I can serve all of those. But as you work to narrow your focus, partitioning out the vertical industry may be really important. And geography can be important. It tends to be less important in something like IT, where products are more transportable across geographical boundaries. But with many kinds of products, there's a real geographical bias, sometimes set by language, sometimes by culture, sometimes by physical logistics. If you have a great trucking firm in the US, that's not much of a foundation for establishing a trucking firm in Japan. None of your advantages in the US market are going to naturally carry over. You can't use the same trucks, you can't use the same drivers. The way you drive and the set of customers and constraints are completely different. And then you can start to look at each one of these little cubes and sort of say, well, how interesting is that to me? Which are the ones that are large enough to support my opportunities? Which ones are small enough that I can target that combination of things to get an unfair advantage? Another really important tool is customer personas. We're going to talk in a few weeks about the difference between customer personas and buyer personas when we get more tactical in thinking about the sales operations. But especially at the fundamental strategy level, where you're looking for product market fit, customer personas is key, because it's really about who is your user. And part of the idea of customer personas is you make it as concrete as possible. You write it down. You give them a name so that everybody in the organization and you can think concretely about it. So if you're selling to a software developer, you may have a persona who is Mac full stack. He's a full stack developer, and that has a particular meaning in terms of what his daily life looks like or what her inputs and outputs look like. Give the person a job title or a life stage if it's in a consumer. Give them at least a rough demographic picture. Where are they? What kind of education do they have? Maybe age is important, maybe not. And give them even more details than you really need, just to make it as visceral as possible. And then understand, what are their goals and motivations? Put yourselves in their shoes. What does their day look like? How are they measured? What makes them happy? What are they worried about from their boss? What are they worried about with the people who work for them? How do they solve tasks? And create functional goals for them. They need to write a report, or they need to produce a working piece of code, or they need to launch a product. And then derive from there what stands in their way for being successful. What external factors cause dissatisfaction? What do they find hard to do or easy to do? And then, now that you've got the context of who they are and what they're trying to do, what is the use case, then start thinking about the product. How often are they going to use the product? What features will they use most? How sophisticated are they? Are they running it on their phone? Are they running on a desktop? Are they sharing the use with somebody else? Do they share the output? Do they need inputs, data from somebody else? And in what form does that data come? Think about the journey as they adopt the product. How did you onboard them? How do they use it? What does success look like for them? How do they get support when they get stuck on something? Even go and find quotes from people like this. Find quotes First, that you can use internally to motivate a focus as you plan, and then quotes from real customers that you can use in talking to others who fit that same profile. I think technology comfort level is also pretty important. What are they tech savvy? What tools do they already use? What are their expectations? And all of this, I think, has a big background, and there's a list of references there that help you understand how to use the persona idea. We're almost done here in talking about tools, but there's a couple more that I think are worth understanding. SWOT is a classic tool. Again, it's about understanding a little bit more about your market and a little bit more about your spot in the ecosystem. It's really about competition. So, what are the strengths of your product? What are the things your product does well? What are the qualities that separate your product from the competitors? What are some of the key things that may be technical capabilities of the product, but they may be because of what your organization can do related to that? It may be because of your customers' relationships. It may be that you have specific assets. What are the weaknesses? Things your product lacks, things your competitors do better, things where you are constrained, maybe in ways that other players are not, or even where is there a lack of clarity in what your value proposition is. Opportunities are really about where you could go from here. What are the underserved markets around you? Where do you see a lack of competition from the usual suspects? What are the trends that are driving needs for your product or for new products? As well as what are the ways that you could increase the visibility? And threats, of course, is the flip side of that. Where are competitors emerging? What are the things that are changing the environment? What are the events, bad news, either in the outside world or about your own company, that may stunt your growth or break your momentum? Are there things that are changing attitudes towards it? I have 3 daughters, and they are by and large really very skeptical about ChatGPT and all of Gen AI. And so this attitude in this Gen Y, Gen Z about AI is something that you have to think about if those are the target customers, particularly for individual use for a product. And finally, I would say that ChatGPT is a powerful tool in the hands of this, in part because these tools know this is the Uber tool. This is a tool that knows all the other tools. You can ask ChatGPT today to do a pains and gains analysis, or build a business model canvas, or whole product chart, or TAM Samsung has great access to lots of market data, some of it good, some of it not so good, can build customer personas, can do SWOT. So you have to take everything it does with a grain of salt. But as a way to understand these tools and to get a starting point, it's useful. But remember, you know more about your segment, or you sure as hell better know more about your segment than ChatGPT does. And therefore, it is what you put into these tools that matters. But I can't overlook the fact that ChatGPT or Anthropic or Google will do a great first pass at some of these things. But don't trust the answer. And it's often too generic. It can be very inconsistent in its data sources, but it can often find good data sources which you can access and reinterpret to find out what really makes some sense. So what do you use the different tools for? What should the tools be telling you? And so here are essentially 5 elements of getting towards a plan. You need a clear picture of who you're targeting and why they choose your product. You need to find a market which you can focus in narrowly initially, but which has huge eventual potential. You need to establish what your differentiation is. You need a map of how you will sell, deliver, and make money. And you need a short-term action plan. What do I wake up tomorrow and do? And you can kind of map these tools into the area of usefulness for them. How you will differentiate, how you will get a handle on what really is, as precisely as possible, the characteristics of the person you need to understand and win. So I would say the key takeaways here are that we have to understand a user as precisely as possible to understand whether an idea that you have can be developed into value, enough value that you can get a customer to open their wallet. You need to understand where are changes taking place, because emerging markets may be small enough today that only a startup would be interested in it. But if successful in the emerging market, you can grow with it and define a new segment that occurs. That being clear about the use case lowers adoption barriers, because you can target much more precisely the circumstances under which somebody would say, that's the perfect product for my problem. Pricing is going to be driven both by what the competition is doing, that sets a pattern and establishes the risk of commoditization and commodity pricing, but also its pricing reflects how important is the pain that you're solving and how much value are you creating for the customer in solving that pain or giving them a gain. The understanding who your partners and competitors are helps define your market position so that you can be clear that you both stand out when you talk about yourself, you define yourself to customers, to employees, to investors, but it also clarifies where are you really making your investments. And finally, I think if you use these tools, you can cover these basic criteria. Who's it for? What is the niche role that it's playing? How is it different? How do you make money? And what do you do tomorrow morning? So that is the essence of the toolkit and the imperative for identifying where you fit in and who you're targeting.